Hi, ladies. Hello,
Hiya.
Amanda. Hello, Jessica.
Hello,
So good
hello.
to
Thank
see
you.
you.
Yes. Thank you for coming on. So as you both know that we're going to be here today talking about the yamas and the niyamas, and some people might be going, well, what's a yama and what's a niyama? So I was sharing with both of you prior to coming on that when I was first introduced to the yamas and the niyamas, I found them to be a little bit on the um, scary side.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I did want to just say, we don't want it to be scary, nice and light. Um, and people are probably going, well, why would they be scary? So with that being said, who would like to start with what are yamas and what are niyamas?
I mean, I could definitely say, would it be okay if I start?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I,
Yeah.
I would say like yamas and niyamas, they are a loose framework of ethical like principles. Maybe you have a preference on what that means to you, but in basic terms, they're just a way to perceive a relationship with yourself and the world.
Mhm.
And they're not rigid at all. It's more so just this fluid, um, these aspects or ideas that you can kind of root into and apply in different ways. Just to be able to feel like you have the sense of center and connection to different ideas. Yeah, would anyone like to maybe say what they are?
Well, yeah, but I actually want to say something about what you just said when you said they're not rigid, and they're fluid. And I think this is a really good thing to kind of just pull out and, and say really quickly, because we aren't rigid and fluid. We grow, we change, the world around us changes. And so it is a framework, and it is a framework that we, are going to be working and looking at, right? But to know that these aren't rigid by any standards, they're not rigid. So, does anybody, did you want to say what the yamas and the niyamas are, or do you want to split them up, or do you guys want to do this?
I feel like we can go kind of like one by one down the line, but I loved what you said, Jess, and that it's like a loose framework. And as we go through them individually, I'm sure we'll offer kind of like some insight into like what kind of practices that might look like. So a lot of how I bring it up is it's a practice, and it's just like everything else is a practice, just like being present is a practice, breathing is a practice, whether you like are conscious, like if you're not really like paying attention to it, then it's just kind of there automatically. But all of these things are just kind of practices and how we center ourselves and how we enter into that, like you said, Jessica, the relationship with ourselves and with the world around us.
Yeah.
So should we start off with the yamas?
That
Yeah.
sounds like a great idea to me.
Cool.
How about Amanda? You start. Maybe name the first two.
Okay. So the yamas are the first two, ahimsa and satya. And I find that these two are very much like in a marriage. So the ahimsa, it translates to nonviolence or non-harm, and it really relates to kind of how we're treating ourselves and treating the world around us. And if our thoughts, words, and actions are rooted in harm or in some way causing violence, or and not necessarily like physical violence, but we'll kind of dive into that. But or are they rooted from a place of love, which I think at the root of all of us is love. So um Satya then is relates to truthfulness and kind of being honest. And I like to think about these in the Buddhist three gates. So the three gates is when you're about to say something: is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? So I like to think about that for not just what you're going to say, but what you're going to do, how you're going to react to things, how you're going to approach any kind of challenge or adversity in life. And I find that they are definitely married together because it's kind of hard to have one without the other. To be truthful in life, um, it calls for us to show up just as we are. It calls us to be authentic and to be honest with who we are in any given moment. And to be in that space takes a lot of courage, and courage requires compassion, and compassion is there in that ahimsa aspect. So I really feel like they're kind of really intertwined in that way. And I'll digress and let you all speak on it.
I think that you did a really good job summing them up and talking about the relationship between the both of them. Um, because in yoga therapy, which is why, we're bringing this up because this is part of what we do, we can use them as mindful practices. We can use them, in yoga practices, yeah, in class, right? But those first two pieces are really foundational because to be able to be self-reflective and to be kind to one, starting with ourselves, makes and carves that path to being able to go out into the world and reflect it back, right? Um, so I really appreciated the way that brought them together and pulled them up. Little marriage there. I like that. Yeah.
I also
Jessica.
really loved, Amanda, how you tied them together. And I totally see that. You can't really have one without the other. Like there is that, especially when you said compassion, like there's this element of being compassionate towards yourself and to be able to kind of offer yourself that gentleness, that kindness, that feeling of being even connected to common humanity. Being able to see that marriage between that truthfulness and being non-harming to yourself, it's kind of like a necessary practice to have before kind of paving the way for the next few yamas and niyamas that we're going to share.
Yeah.
I
And
agree.
should we maybe say too that how many of each there are?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah,
We're
we don't
so
have 100
excited to
of them.
dive
That's the
in.
good news.
Yeah, imagine there was like 100. That would be something.
We're gonna be here for a while, everyone. Settle in.
Ooh.
Grab a cup of coffee.
Right? So
So
there's
yeah, go for it,
okay,
Mary.
5 and 5. 5 yamas, 5 niyamas. Yeah, and they both and I do want to kind of maybe segue into one piece of just saying that there's two sets. And I think Jessica, you may have already kind of touched into this, but there's the yamas and then the niyamas, right? And the yamas are kind of how we relate to the world, and then the niyamas kind of more of that self-reflective piece. So uh that way you got it, Jessica, we've got 5 and 5.
Okay.
I
So only
also
3 more to go with the yamas.
I also like to say that this is like part of the philosophical practices of yoga. And while they can get like deep, but they can also be pretty practical practices.
Mhm.
And these are like ancient practices. These are not like new novel ideas. These are ancient things, and they have been around for a very, very long time, especially in the teachings of yoga, which has been around for longer than any of us have.
Yes, that is true. That is true. And I do want to also impart in there, and maybe you both can kind of help with this. Um, the reason that we include the yamas and the niyamas as part of the therapeutic, piece. Did I say that right?
Yes.
Into the yoga therapeutic piece is because so often, um, and again, this is something that we touched on prior to our session or interview together, um, is that sometimes we don't have boundaries or a sense of what is me, what is you, how do I navigate in the world, because we're either working on, the peer norms or our familial norms, not really tapping into our true authentic self. And so, like with compassion, for ourselves and others, I think that I might be kind of delving too deep into a rabbit hole about this, but sometimes we have this view of the world based on what other people think, and that kind of takes away from our own compassion because we're not cueing into what's really going on in our hearts and how we see the world, especially as it changes. So, going back to that idea of them not being rigid, because what our thought process is and how we are navigating the world when we're 12, right, versus 20, 30, 40, it's always going to be shifting and changing. So,
Yeah. And that also touches again on the satya, the truthfulness of like, are we living our lives based on these messages that we're getting from the external world, or some skewed messages that have kind of were weaved their way into our brains and into our minds? Or can we start to kind of peel back those layers? And this is kind of foreshadowing, but I think they're all intertwined. But can we peel back some of those layers to kind of show up more as our true selves and not what is expected, like you said.
mhm. Yeah. Okay, so we've gone through two. Jess, you want to go over the next two, maybe three?
Sure. Yeah, I'll do the next two, and then Marie, you want to take the last one?
We'll see.
We'll see. Or Amanda can
We'll see
hop
how
back.
I kind of weave myself in there.
Okay. So yeah, continuing on with the yamas. So Amanda shared the ahimsa, satya, and the next two is asteya and brahmacharya. Uh, and these ones also, I feel like just like how Amanda mentioned that there's like a sister pair of like ahimsa and satya, it's kind of like they build up kind of the capacity to go to the next, but asteya. Asteya can be known as non-stealing. So non-stealing, I like to see this in terms of not stealing time from yourself, not stealing time or not stealing just from others, like taking time away from if you're in a conversation with someone and you're practicing the principles of asteya, maybe you don't steal the next word or take time to just listen. It's like giving that space to almost digest life. And also not stealing from yourself in the respect of, let's say you've had a really busy week, and to implement asteya, something that I would practice and share with people I work with is to practice asteya is to actually give yourself space to take a nap or rest, if so you're not stealing from yourself time that could have been used to refuel you instead of deplete you. So that's one way I like to see asteya, in terms of an ethical kind of guideline to practice. Um, and I think on a more basic level, non-stealing, like don't steal from others, like physical things too, like don't steal, be honest, be true. And then that ties back to satya, the truthfulness aspect, being honest. So yeah, I think these two, they're kind of like more fluid maybe together, like they build off of each other and you can't really do one without the other. But when you see them as a whole, you can kind of bridge them together and create this foundation of like stability when you do use them. So that's what I'm going to say about asteya first. But I'll introduce brahmacharya and then maybe we can chat about what your perspectives are with these. Brahmacharya, I see this as like moderation, finding more of that middle way. Sometimes it can also be said, I'm like losing the word. Does anyone know what brahmacharya can also be referred to?
I know in
Well,
some thoughts it's related to celibacy, but I like moderation better. The way that I define it as the right use of energy.
Yeah.
yeah. Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, Amanda. That was definitely what I was thinking, and I couldn't remember the word. But yeah, it can be kind of thought of in that same thread of like celibacy, but the way I guess we'll view it today is in more of just a more practical way, and way you can maybe identify with this yama a little bit is that moderation. So, for example, a practice in applying brahmacharya could be, let's say you're working a lot, and I feel like this is going to come up too a lot, that finding that middle way. It comes up in Buddhist traditions. It comes in um, the philosophy of the golden mean, like even thinking of that middle way of that balance between excess and non-excess. Like, what is that middle way that you can walk? Um, if you're working a lot and you feel like you're kind of not giving yourself time to refuel, revitalize, kind of refill your tank. And a way to apply brahmacharya then could be really helpful is to find that middle way of that value and to walk with that sense of more moderation instead of excess or non-excess of a value. But yeah, that's what I
Yeah.
think of brahmacharya.
I really like the way you said that. And I think that balance is the key piece in there. Finding balance, because I'll just use adolescence, my first thought when you're talking was like adolescence, because we tend to do so much socializing and partying and, hanging out with friends. And when it comes to, say, school, maybe not so much. Right. Or in some cases, it's the exact opposite, right? Like there's, I'm going to focus on the books and the education, but not make time, in my life to have a social life, right? So I do really appreciate you bringing in the word, or the words and of balance and harmony. How about you, Amanda?
Yeah, I love the balance part, and I also think that is an act of compassion and non-harming, is giving yourself the space um, to give to fill your resource yourself, and to also then involve yourself in the community around you. So like that balance piece is also rooted in ahimsa. And I also want to kind of work my way back to satya as well, because if we are using a lot of energy, right? This is brahmacharya. So if you're using a lot of energy to avoid your truth, avoid the truth, whatever it is, and then you have to like eventually go back and retrace your steps and make amends or whatever, that's, you stole your time. So you not only were rooting yourself in harm by taking this path of what you thought was less resistance, but ended up being more. You used more energy and you stole from yourself. So like it all just integrates so much into each other. And that's why it is so like fluid and kind of amorphous, and able to like kind of take one practice and root it into another. And yeah, and how they work together to build just a foundation. I thought the way that you described it was lovely. Thank you.
It really was, yeah. And using it, again, in a yoga therapy, right? Helping people to find that balance, that's a huge piece. How do we find that balance and why is it important? Which Amanda spoke right into, which is great. Okay. So I just want to point out here that my Sanskrit is not always very eloquent. So aparigraha.
You said that perfectly.
2 thumbs up.
Okay, so it was funny. I kind of had to laugh when I realized I was the one who was going to be speaking on aparigraha, um, because I am an earth sign. Very, I love my place, right? So non-attachment.
Hey, I am with you, Marie. I feel very similar. Like having your own sense of space is so important.
Yeah. But it does become an issue when we become too attached. Right.
That it can.
Um, it can, and it's funny because again, it just feeds right into, everything else because when we're too attached to something, whether it be a material object, a relationship, a habit, uh, we really need to find the space to be self-reflective on that. You know, I'll just start with the material thing. Is the material thing something that you still need? You know, probably not, right? Do you have value on it more so than something else? And are you being truthful about it, right? So going back to the original ones that we spoke about, when it comes to relationships, when relationships kind of, get to a point where we're holding on, but does it still serve us? And when I say service, I mean, does it bring us to our highest potential? Is it helping the other person to be at their highest potential? Sometimes not. Sometimes we hang on to this idea of what is a, positive relationship, even when it's not, because at times, and this comes back to the habits thing, we outgrow a behavior or a relationship as part of the journey that we're on. And there is a grieving piece that goes along with it. And sometimes the idea of the grief is so overwhelming that we stay in a position or a space that we shouldn't necessarily be in, or we hold on to something materialistic instead of just letting it go. Um, so that's how I would define the last of our yamas there. What do you guys think?
I think you said it very, very well, and I love it. As someone who is prone to clutter, I am literally on a spring cleaning spree of trying to get rid of some of that stuff and detach from the things that I'm just like, I haven't used this in 10 years. Like I don't need it anymore. And really kind of going through that process with the material things. I also think sometimes we can um, have like a yearning or a longing for maybe a version of us that we are no longer, or
Mhm.
for like when I was 20 I was flexible and strong and whatever, but now I'm 60 and I can't move this part of my body, and you're putting so much attachment and energy into what was before, instead of being able to kind of come into the present and be um, here with what is, and be kind of detached from what was before and what's to come next, and being allowed to be here and really rooted in the present, which is an act of compassion, right? It's kind of like letting yourself grieve what was before and then come into where you are now. And I think we can work that into a lot of yoga therapy practices, a lot of self-reflective practices of letting go of what was, and putting more of our energy into what serves us now.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also
And that,
I Yeah. Can I say something quick? Just to echo off
absolutely.
of what Amanda's saying, just because I
Yeah.
think there's so much wisdom there. And you said that really, really eloquently too, Amanda and Marie, the way you introduced a parigraha. Uh there is like also with that, just to touch on, because I know that this is something, Amanda, you've talked about, like just the experience of grief and how that shows up, and the aparigraha, I feel like it is a way to apply maybe more of a connection or an acceptance around the nature of grief, which is such a human experience to experience, and it can so easily get overlooked. When it's wild because grief is such a like transformative emotion, but very, very sometimes hard to really, really understand the layers and the complexity that it can bring. But there's also so much like potential in that too, and alchemy. So yeah, I just really wanted to echo that in terms of aparigraha with the non-attachment and having it be a space to also like recognize your humanness, and that maybe when we do come to a season where we have those spring cleanings or need to let go, it's not always easy to let go before we can accept, you know, the versions of ourselves that we were, maybe with different people, or yeah, that there's a lot of nuance there, but we're keeping this pretty light today. But I feel like a parigraha can be a really deep one.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, so many things that I could comment on, but we'll save that for another deeper
Another
conversation.
day.
Maybe we'll just have one episode on Paragraph.
Parigraha. It definitely can.
I have to agree with you. Yeah, we could probably just do one whole episode on that. Yeah, and I just want to say one, just both of you have been bringing up some amazing points, but the complexity in the gift of grief and letting go, you both have now spoken into, which is great because I think that all of us at some point in our lives, we were in a season of grief and it can feel so overwhelming. And I think it is really important for all of us to remember that, going back to the word, alchemy, and, why I use the word alchemy is because there's this experiential piece that blooms and blossoms into wisdom and peeling back maybe different layers of who we are, and how we are perceiving the world. And that growth is so amazing. And it's such a gift. But when you're in that grief, we can forget that. And so I hope that, for all of us, that are here, and listening, to remember that when we're in those deepest moments of not wanting to let something, to remember the other side of it.
Yeah.
And everything
Okay.
in moderation, right? We use our grief for a period of time to get what we need to learn from it, and then little by little we start to incorporate it and create more joy. That's a very deep topic that, again, you can refer back to maybe my episode about it.
Right.
But I think that also segues us into the niyamas pretty well when we talk about kind of the observances of how the self-reflection and like the kind of more inner work. Not that the other 5 weren't, but I like how the niyamas we just naturally went into that.
Yeah, I see that perfect segue as well, Amanda.
Yeah.
I kind of did just like seeing that thread in Aparigraha and how we're gonna like just talk about the niyamas now. Feel like it's really, really potent. Like it feels really right.
It does. It does. So since you both are like, there it is.
Here we
What
are.
have you guys done?
Yeah. I can go again now. I guess it's my turn. So the first niyama is saucha, and that usually translates to purity or purification. Maybe thinking about like cleanliness or kind of clearing thoughts, mind, body. I like to now go back to the clutter person inside of me that just has likes things. I really love shopping vintage stuff and like I like tchotchkes and things. So anyway, I think about that in this realm. So when we do tend to collect a lot of things, it can create a little bit of a mess. And that might not be like actual buying things. It could also be like mail. Like, I don't know, most mail is junk these days, but like if you still get paper mail, like sometimes it can just pile up and we forget. Like it was just tax season recently. So like, we might have just had like a bunch of paperwork just kind of piling up and kind of cluttering our desk or our space. And I find that with the more like stuff and like clutter we have around in our physical environment, how it mirrors our inner environment and vice versa, right? So like we can kind of have that impact on our internal and external environments when we have just a lot of stuff churning through the body, through the mind, through the spirit, through our physical space and our physical environments. So Salsha asks us to clean, to like kind of clean our thoughts, clean our space. And maybe sometimes cleaning the space might help clear the mind. And I really like this practice for coming back to, like, if I'm experiencing anxiety and having like a lot of just constant thought, that I could do a cleaning or clearing breath and let some of that stuff go, right? That is something that is free. We have easy access to it. All we have to do is just like think about it and then do it. And then when we do it, we can kind of clear that energy out and clear out some of that mind clutter, that mind chatter, which is literally one of the main reasons yoga exists, is to kind of clear that mind chatter, that monkey mind, and help kind of give us, again, the gift of presence. Yeah, so that's my spiel on Saucha. So purify the mind, purify the heart, all of that good stuff. The second is Santosha, and Santosha is one of my absolute favorites, and it's challenging and it's beautiful and it's a gift. It translates essentially to contentment. And I find this relative in so many things that we've said already, and like being able to kind of accept where we are and be okay with just who we are, present in the moment, not yearning for the past or the future, not attached to some other idea of what we're supposed to be or what we're supposed to have, and showing up in that kind of that honest, vulnerable space of just like, here I am, just as I am. I might be dealing with some chronic pain, but I know that I have access to my breath and I can breathe through this, and I can be here, and I can be content that I'm still alive and still able to do this work to peel those layers back and become my most truest version of myself. That's what I have to say. I could say so much more, but I'm gonna stop.
No, I love that, Amanda. And contentment, I also will add such a like important niyama, not that all of them aren't, but it's like one of the ones that when you do like really feel it, I just feel like you just change just your
It's
nature is when you
magic.
actually do like embody contentment. It's like, because the way I see it too, and I feel like this is one that also comes up a lot in the people with the people I work with, in my yoga therapy practice. And so many, and it's, I think it again like zooms out like collectively, like I just think a lot of people like to do a lot of things, and that's not a bad thing, but it can keep us away from our feeling of being content and actually knowing like, what does it feel like to be content? And there's like just so many times I hear people say, I don't know how to be content. And I feel like that's such a common thing with so many people. I find myself too, like even knowing these things and knowing like how to practice them, I'll find myself some weeks be like, I feel really like discontented about things and I don't know why. And we might not know why, but it's like being with the mystery of, how to then shift the focus back to practicing the active parts of, and it is a practice, like being able to practice being content. And that can open a whole door to like mindfulness tools, somatic experiencing, all the things. But I feel like a lot can go back to Santosha and contentment.
Yeah. I mean, the
Absolutely.
practice of gratitude is like, I have my own qualms with it. I go back and forth where I'm like, I don't want to do this. But I also, when I do it and I mean it, it feels so impactful, and it can change the trajectory of an entire day if I start with gratitude and being able to just say like, cool, I woke up today, right? Not everybody got to wake up today. I got to wake up today and enjoy this, whatever weather we're having, and just experience life on earth. And that's really magnificent.
It
Yeah.
really is. And it was so funny just to be listening to you, Jessica, because again, it's feeding right back into all of the things that we've been talking about. You know, let's go back to being compassionate, to
Mhm.
ourselves and looking at what is truthful and authentic in us now, right?
Mhm.
What do we need to let go of? Where do we need to find balance, right? So, absolutely going through all of these different layers and coming to a point of contentment. I I'll share like a little blip of a story, but I actually had somebody tell me that somebody had asked them, oh, are you happy in your marriage? And this, person replied back, I'm content, right?
Mm.
And the other person's reply was, well, don't you want more? Right. And, that kind of stuck in my head because I remember I was probably about 30-ish years old when I remember looking over at my husband at that point and going, I just realized I'm content, you know, and maybe for some people they wouldn't necessarily understand that idea of content,
Yeah.
but to go from one end of, just grief and depression and, my own little issues, right? Over to the ecstatic, oh, I got to go out and I got to, do this and I got to go do that, right? To all of a sudden realize that I had been living a balanced life was an amazing thing for me. I mean, it was huge. It was like this whole light bulb went off in my head, like, oh, this is great,
Yeah.
So yeah.
And it sounds like too, Marie, like just also echoing off that with that and that experience you had, like it was so transformative to you. And that's like where the yamas and niyamas, where they exist in like the frame of yoga therapy. It's in, and this is why like I also think that this part, especially being like we are in the West, like in the United States, and sometimes like this is not the part that people think when they think of yoga. And having like these ways of perceiving our truth, our experience. And I feel like we need mental frameworks to kind of hold and like create an outline. So we have
Mhm.
kind of something to follow. Um, Rather than there being this amorphous like kind of space. Cause yeah, there is a space, there is the ethers. But looking at the yamas and niyamas and that transformation you had and being able to bring awareness to the fact that that was important to you to see, I'm
Yeah.
content in the marriage. And then relay it back to, okay, I know what contentment is and like I'm applying it. And it's in that notion you are like actively participating and practicing the contentment. And that
Mm.
is kind of a long-winded answer of saying like how we work with people to also see that this is something worth paying attention to. Like it's something to pay attention to, and it's not just something to gloss over. Like it's a part of the transformation to be able to
Yeah.
acknowledge and bring awareness to, I am practicing contentment and I feel content. I feel content. Oh, that's different than I feel like I'm rushing and I'm not grounded. Yeah. So yeah, the awareness of the practice of contentment.
Nice. Okay, so we got a couple more to go. You up for it,
Tapas,
Jess?
Svadhyaya, and Ishvara Pranadhana. Which one should I do, Marie? You tell me.
How about if you do the next two and I'll shut up with the last one.
Okay.
Sound good? Okay.
So moving on to the last, well, there's five niyamas. So Amanda already covered Saucha, Santosha, and the next two is tapas and svadhyaya. So I do have a little list here. That's what I'm looking at, but I do know them, but sometimes it's good to just cue your memory.
Yeah.
Tapas is the idea of self-discipline, and tapas, to apply tapas, it's like You can also think of, and I feel like I always use this example because it's so practical, but that idea of like the diamond and the coal, and like the coal being on the outside of the diamond, and sometimes we have to undergo states of pressure to transform into this diamond, just like nature does with coal to a diamond, to that state of undergoing a sense of pressure or through growth, through our own personal growth, whether it's physically, like exercising, transforming your body physically, um, learning new ways of being in the world, it takes discomfort. And sometimes, and not that tapas is discomfort, it's self-discipline, and self-discipline can be a form of self-love. So also understanding tapas has this thread that sometimes it can be perceived as people have perspectives about what discipline means to them. But one way that I like to just view this specific niyama is it is the nature of discipline, but it's in more of like a tender way, and a way of like loving your evolution, like, and knowing that it's not, even if you do feel the discomfort of growing, it's like growing pains. It's like more so it's teaching you that feeling of resilience, of expanding past your comfort zone, instead of maybe doing the same thing every day. The nature of change is there's going to be some times we're going to feel like we're growing. We're going to feel a little bit out of our way of being, because to be different, we have to kind of be open to the possibility of what it feels like to be different, and what it is like to embody a new identity or perspective. But that's what I'm going to say about tapas. Does anyone want to add maybe how they perceive tapas?
No, I think you did a really good job. But again, it just brought me right back into everything else. It's like having the compassion, for yourself, being truthful with yourself, letting go of what you need to let go of, finding that balance by having, self-discipline, and it can be very challenging. I think sometimes when we think about self-discipline, we think about it, oh, I have to go to the gym, I have to go and walk, I have to, eat healthy, but, all these little things. But self-discipline can also mean, I forgot who said it, might have been you, Amanda. But basically, making time for yourself, for self-care, like a nap, making time for self-care for your practices, because these are the things like Jessica mentioned, that when we have these little pressures, it starts to mold us, into the diamond, right? So sometimes we can think of the word discipline as negative, but in fact, the positive pieces of it um, are all in there. So we get to come out and we shine bright.
I love that. And I do think it is so important to carve out that time for the practices and rituals that ground you and that center you and that ultimately create harmony in your life. And that takes discipline.
Mhm.
I've also have two other things that just kind of popped up and I would love to share is I just had this revelation that like going through grief is kind of a form of tapas, right? So like you are in the throes of so many complex emotions and feelings and experiences, and eventually when you create intentional space to work with it, you find the diamond in the rough, like you find the joy in grief. And that is a practice of alchemy. That is a practice of not shying away from it, not sweeping it under the rug. And that can go with so many different things, right? So I wanted to kind of bring that up. And then also Kelly Finn, who is an instructor at the Maryland University of Integrative Health, she's a yoga therapist. I believe she is located in, I don't, maybe Midwest. I'm not quite sure, but she's wonderful. She once shared a writing that was literally called "Even the Word Obstacle is an Obstacle." And the first line is, "Try to love everything that gets in your way." And that really resonated with me when you were talking, Jess, about like continuing along the path and loving the life that you're showing up to, even when it's hard, even when there's adversity in the way, even when you're faced with challenge. And it's because everything is a learning lesson. And maybe that just kind of segues us into the next one.
So good, Amanda. Literally like making me I felt so much from that, and that was so powerful. Yeah, I'm going to keep thinking of that throughout the week, but no, that was such a good segue into Svidhyaya, which is the next niyama. Svidhyaya can also be known as like self-study, and self-study meaning observing your actions, your ways of thinking, your habits. It's this observation place of just observing, like, who am I? What do I like? What are my interests? Really discerning who you are versus who is the other. Like, what what am I all about? Like, that's what I think of when I think of Svidhyaya. And I think when it comes to the individual disciplines and the niyamas, Svidhyaya, there's a lot of exploration with Svidhyaya. When I think of the self-study aspect, it's just exploring, what's out there, what resonates with me, and maybe an act of applying Svidhyaya is, I see with a lot of people who are more like artistic and like creative, like this element of Svidhyaya becomes this exploration of self in maybe art, or like creating what makes your heart sing, or whatever is resonant to you, whether it's like you're writing poetry, or you're creating like digital art, or whatever it is. Self-study comes in and it's kind of mirroring to yourself, like who you are, and maybe it's in the work you create. But yeah, it's such a beautiful exploration of the self, Svidhyaya, and it looks different for every single person. I do want to add, like, self-study, it is not just, and this comes back to even what we said in the beginning, that it's different than like it being like a social norm where this is right and this is wrong. There is no one way to study yourself, because we are all so different. You have these complexities that maybe the person next to you or in your family doesn't have. And just being able to bear witness to, your own eccentric traits and qualities, it just kind of, it also brings a sense of like just exuberance and radiance, because you're able to kind of touch that pulse of what is this essence of me that maybe is different from someone else. And I think the exploration of Svidhyaya can go hand in hand in like the artist journey and just the creative process, but that's a whole other conversation too, but I'm gonna leave that there.
I love that. I think it's such a beautiful way to bring that in and to explore that topic. I love Svidhyaya in the way of that it just kind of like, when we intentionally take the time to kind of study ourselves in this way, it's becoming, or what I try to apply into my practices and into my work with my clients, is that you become a compassionate witness to who you are, to your behaviors, your actions, your thoughts. Do they align with all of the other yamas and niyamas, or like the ones that are really important to you at this time? Do they align with your values? Are you, behaving in a way that feels authentic and real, and honoring of the truth that lives within you? And then what can we do to, what adjustments can we make? So then we figure out what practices we're doing to step into ourselves a little bit more fully and allow that self-expression to come through. And I think that's such a beautiful way. And it's not, it's not, like you said, not one way or the other. There's so many different ways to do this. There's journaling, there's going on traveling. There's so many different ways that you can bring this in. Just a yoga class, going for a walk. There's so many things. Like, this can be applied to almost every aspect of your life. How are you driving? Like, how do you react in traffic? That kind of stuff is I like to bring in, because it's really helpful for people to then be like, oh, I am reacting negatively to other people being negative towards me, and like, could you respond instead in kindness instead of breeding more harm? Yeah, I love it.
That was, both of you were amazing.
I'm just loving this conversation.
No, my cheeks
Yeah.
kind of hurt because I'm like,
I
I'm so
know.
excited.
Yeah, it's so funny too, because I keep looping back, going like, so, and I do want to point that out. I keep looping back, because if we really do understand how they feed into one another, that's going to be a very helpful part of the journey, because when we are looking at being truthful and not stealing from ourselves and others and holding a compassionate space,
Mm.
as we do our reflective studies. It's not always easy. As a matter of fact, as a marriage and family therapist and as a yoga therapist, I think, in both situations, one of the harder elements is when we do have to go into that self-reflective piece, because we don't always have an awareness of what we're doing or how we show up in the world. And I think I'll just kind of leave it right there.
Can I actually ask you, Marie, just from your
Mhm.
experience,
Mhm.
what do you do when you do find like the people that you're working with and they hit that place that maybe they didn't have awareness at? And it's like,
Mhm.
okay, you do have this, they're exploring themselves. And then what if like as they're exploring, they don't have that compassion developed to be able just to kind of change the way they're perceiving themselves? Because I find this happens sometimes, and I'd love to hear just like your perspective of like how to go about like if someone is trying to like observe themselves and they're not liking like what they see, like how to kind of change the conversation to be one of more like inviting compassion.
Well, as a therapist, there's two methods that I would actually use a lot. One of them was the Gestalt, having somebody, if you're looking at, somebody in the chair, right? And having that conversation of why are you seeing this in a negative way, right? Like, what would you tell somebody else? I also tend to kind of go back to that freeloading, uh, shoot, roommate that lives in your head, that just likes to leave trash everywhere
Oh
and then
yeah, I
blame
know
you
that
for
one.
it. Yeah, yeah, you know that one? Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Like the
and
inner critic, like something like that.
yeah, exactly, the inner critic. But I always kind of use that freeloading, because we all have an idea of what it feels like to be around somebody who doesn't bring a positive influence into our lives. And then I switch that back around again. It's like, okay, fine. Now that you know that, like, if you were your own best friend, right? Or let's now bring your best friend in here, what would they say? Right. And I just kind of try to show like different mirrors of how we can look at it. And then there's a few times that I've actually had them draw things, because sometimes
Mm.
that inner critic starts really young and it's a pre-verbal. And so for them, art can help to see a little bit of what's happening on a much deeper level that, of course, we don't necessarily use yoga therapists since we're not
Yeah.
therapists, but it is something for them to do, and then they can reflect and see what they see. And then at that point, we can say, if you want to dive deeper into this, maybe you go see this person, right? But
Yeah.
that's where the journaling and that self-reflective piece comes in. So I hope I answered that okay.
Yes. No, I really like how the way that you said that you kind of will start kind of shifting the perspective and kind of get holding the mirror up, because that's
Yeah.
exactly kind of I feel like the essence of self-study. but also kind of if someone is not able to see that mirror in a compassionate way, you kind of
Yeah.
as that person holding the space for them is also, it's that you're that functional guide, that mirror holding that space and
Mhm.
encouraging and maybe teaching ways to start to reinforce seeing the more compassionate side.
Yeah. Especially when you're dealing with people who have a lot of shame and guilt, it can be really challenging to get them through that piece. And the more compassion that we have and the more non-judgmental energy we bring in, the better
Mhm.
off they are. So that's, and again, those are two key components to being a yoga therapist. So
Yeah, definitely. So I think there's one more.
yes, there is. So I love the
You can
Yamas
phone
and
a
the Niyamas.
friend.
I just love saying them. Uh, so Ishvara Pranidhyana. How did that one go?
You did
Anyone
good.
give
I'll give you one thumbs up. I'm just kidding.
okay,
You get two.
how about 1.5? 1.5. Um, okay, so this actually is probably one of my most favorite ones. I mean, I love them all, but for me, one of my most favorite ones. But part of it is because I had the experience of understanding on two different levels of why this particular niyama is so important. At a very young age, I had a spiritual awakening of sorts. Um, and when I looked back into my childhood and I looked back at, this particular incident that happened, feeling that connection to, for me, God, um, gave me purpose. It gave me reason to continue to exist in a world that felt very chaotic, and disheartening. Um, and then I had another situation come up where I was isolating myself a lot, and I had a couple of people go, "You're isolating yourself a lot." And then one friend in particular was like, "You need to come out and you need to be with your friends." And she likened it to, if when a tree falls in the forest, the other trees hold it up, right? And I was like, oh, okay. So with this particular um, niyama, it's about finding support and connection to others, something greater. It could be to the earth, it could be to your family, it could be to your friends. Um, but it's that ability to find support. And when I'm personally teaching my yoga classes, I actually use my yoga blocks. This is my support. And I laugh about it because I used to be one of those instructors. I don't need those blocks. I don't need those silly things. Well, I definitely need them now. And I have found that they do, in fact, help me to move into my practices on a deeper level. And finding support also helps me to move into a deeper level and into the world, a much stronger and healthier version of myself. So that is my take. At least my personal, it's a lot of personal stuff in there, take on our final niyama. So, how about you guys?
I love that, and I often tell a lot of my like students when I'm teaching yoga classes that my blocks don't leave my hands, like they are a part of me. So I use them often as well. And I kind of liken Ishvara Pranidhana to like like taking the next step even if you can't see the next step, and
Yeah.
having a sense of faith and trust that things are going to work out, because the universe is here to like work with us if we open up to work in relationship with it. And that can get a little esoteric, and oftentimes I've heard this, translation of like with Ishvara Pranidhana, like walking with God. So I'm just going to say walking with good. And when we choose to walk with goodness in our hearts and our minds and our spirits, and attempt to bring in goodness into our bodies through all of these other practices, then things are going to work out for us. Like I have to believe that, because otherwise it's too disheartening to not, right? Like if we hold on to that faith and have that ability to trust that there is something larger at play here, it feels so much more full in my heart, and it feels so much more possible. Things, just the world opens up to just so much more possibility.
Yeah, it's that light. It's definitely the light. And I like that you said good versus God, because I believe in God, but not everybody believes in, the God that I'm referring to, right? If they believe in God. And so I do think that that's a really important aspect to also kind of mention right now, is that, this is not a religion, it's a philosophy. And so, to be able to take the spirit of this particular yama and bring it to, walking good, has been, at least for me, hearing it, beautiful, because when we get lost in the grief and the sadness, um, and we can't let go and have compassion for ourselves or others, there's this murkiness that we kind of fall into. And so when we have our sight set on the light and we take those steps forwards, like you mentioned, Amanda, we also become a light. And I can't even say that enough. Like I literally, it probably might sound kind of weird to some people, and for others they might be like, oh yeah, I do that too. In my deepest, darkest moments of grief, I started smiling at people and just giving them compliments, because I would watch them light up and it would light me up. And it all came to me when I was having a really bad moment, and I went through a line at a store, and the cashier she was such a light. And I had to literally tell her, you like just, really touched my heart. And I, just walked out, and I'm like, I'm going to do that. So I started walking around and doing it. But I realized that as I was doing it and I was doing it to other people, like they would just light up. And I actually have had other people say that they now go and do it too, you know? And that to me, just that joy, right? Yeah, exactly. I don't have words for it, because it's all here in my heart.
I can only just like, I'm either gonna cry or I just have to put my hand on my heart, or both. That's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I relate.
Yeah, I think there's just so much wisdom between all of us here, and it's just such a delight to get to like have this type of conversation. And like you said, Amanda, you just have to have that belief, because without that belief, and that's exactly what the Yamas and Niyamas are. Like it stems from the ethical practice and ethical philosophy of yoga, but they are these moral principles and beliefs also that give us a sense of meaning. And we as human beings, we're like meaning making machines. We like need to have a sort of meaning, otherwise things can feel like we're just like moving through world without a sense of being tethered to something.
It's just chaos.
Yeah. So
Absolutely.
definitely taking the time to like go through these and talk about them. It all just like reinforces again just the importance of these in not only yoga therapy practice, but if people are listening and maybe they're just getting introduced to like the yamas and niyamas, that this can be such like a wealth of insight and wisdom that can come from just like getting curious and being open to, what does this mean? And just kind of exploring it for yourself and how that fits into your life.
And
Yeah.
also just to note that like you can do yoga and not do postures.
Yeah.
Just going to plug that out there because, you know, with the Western version of yoga, it's so very much rooted in the movement. And that's just a tiny little piece of it. This is a whole like billion lifetimes worth of work to do in the field of yoga. Like this, some people might, you know, access ahimsa in one lifetime and be able to like kind of feel like they got it down. There's enough work here in these practices to bolster us and help us create a more meaningful and purposeful life.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so much
Yeah.
you can do not on your yoga mat. It's the
Yeah.
application to your life, and it becomes
Mhm.
this way of being in life by being able to walk from this path of goodness and bringing it forward and outwards from this place where the niyamas ask us to look within and reflect, to then be able to walk forward and out in our communities and kind of offer that goodness, that connection to spirit, which I think can sometimes get lost in translation and sometimes be maybe more in, not to say that the spirit only lives in like religion, but like we as just human beings, we need that connection to something, whether it's a sense of meaning, purpose, feeling supported, connection to spirit, however you feel that. But there is that essence of, we need that to feel full, to feel like we're thriving. Some more than others, but it's definitely an important part of being human.
I agree.
Yeah. I think that we did an excellent job covering the yamas and the niyamas and how they work in yoga therapy. Because you know, Amanda, you mentioned that it's not just, you know, a pose, and Jessica, not just on the mat. You know, there's much more to the yogic philosophy. And so this was an amazing conversation that has really touched me on several levels. Like, you know, one, it touched my inner nerd of, oh, let's geek out on the yamas and the yamas, right? Um, but also just my heart and the ability to, I'm hoping it felt like this to me, um, to go through them on a fairly deep level, but lighthearted, you know, and in a way that people hopefully can understand. You know, so if there's anything that you guys would like to wrap up with.
Be kind, be open, and live your most beautiful life with your true colors shining.
And just a thank you. Thank you for anyone listening. Thank you for being here. And thank you, Marie, for putting this together.
Thank you for being here. My little dream. Ladies, thank you so much. I hope that we can have more of these amazing conversations, because I do think that one of the things that came up for me today, which was actually not super surprising, but surprising, um, and Jess, you actually spoke into it. You know, it doesn't just have to be on the mat. These are all things that, you know, we can do outside of, you know, our yogic practice as we think of it on a mat. But even if you're not in yoga therapy, or you're just hearing this and you're just kind of digging into what yoga or yoga therapy is, to hopefully have a foundation now as to what the yamas and the niyamas are in a way that feels good. So thanks, guys. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
you.